If you stretch on a daily basis, even for 10 or 15 minutes, the muscles learn to adapt to that particular movement, and they learn how to relax. We have a stretch reflex that holds us back from stretching too far. If we go too far in the stretch, all of a sudden that stretch reflex says, uh-oh, that hurts, don't do that. You want to go to the point where you have a comfortable stretch, but not a painful stretch. I have 6 top stretches that I'd like to show you today that you can incorporate into your routine. And I've got Ben, my model here, who's going to give us the first demonstration. This first one's called a lying leg crossover, and for most of us, we have a lot of tightness all the way through our low back and our hips and our glutes, and this really targets your glute muscles, and there's several different permutations from that particular stretch. So I'm going to have Ben start on his back here and just come into the lying leg crossover. It's in a sit-up position, and I'm just going to have Ben bring his right leg over the top. Now in this first movement, all we're going to do is just elevate his down leg, and that just cues your glutes initially. So what we're feeling right now is that we can feel that glute, and Ben, you can kind of point to the spot where you feel a little bit of tension just right in the glute right there. Now we can add to that load by putting his arm on the inside of his knee and actually pushing away and simultaneously pulling up with this hand. And the idea in doing the stretching is to stretch the muscle in slightly different planes. So we can push away. We can also change the position by bringing the hand around to the outside of the knee and pulling the knee towards the inside of the chest as if a crossover move. We can add to that by extending your upper leg straight up, and we get a little different stretch and a different load. The second stretch is the hip flexor stretch, and our hip flexors are located in this region. When we stretch our hip flexors, we have to think, well, what's the purpose of doing that? Well, when you're running, you're obviously engaging your hip flexors every time your knee comes up on each stride. In a cycling position, your hip flexors are engaged all the time, and it's a very, very tight muscles. So quite often I see people do this incorrectly. We want to set this hip flexor stretch by dropping the down knee at an angle at about 110 degrees at the hip. And when we do this, we don't want to drag that knee back too far, nor arch our back. So Ben, I'm going to ask you just to tuck your pelvis underneath. And as soon as we do that and we push down on that knee and actually push down with a forward heel, we're going to feel that hip flexor begin to stretch just by doing this particular movement. Now we can add to the stretch by elongating the arm on the down leg. So just raise your arm overhead, and we can initiate that stretch and get a little greater stretch through that hip flexor. And finally, just give a little bit of lean forward, about 1 inch or 2 inches stop. That's good right there. And now we have a really perfect stretch for that hip flexor. This third stretch is the perfect piriformis hip glute stretch. Big mouthful, and it can be done a lot easier than trying to say it. The starting position for this stretch, I have Ben with his hands directly in front of his shoulders, just outside shoulder width, arms straight, chest real high, and chin high looking forward. Try not to arch the lower back. The heel actually is right in the crotch, and we're going to move that heel underneath our quad on the opposite leg in just a second. So on the first part of the stretch, you can actually push down on the opposite side as if pushing down with his hips, and you can actually get a little bit of hip flexor stretch to initiate that. The back leg is extended straight out behind with the toes pointed. Now I'm going to have you move your heel underneath your quad, Ben. Now as we do this, I'm going to gradually have him begin to rotate to this outer side to bring his glute down towards the floor. So he's going to slowly rotate towards me, keep his arms pretty straight as he's doing this, bring his glute all the way down to the floor, and then just rotate back up 2 or 3 inches. So it's a very slow pulse where you're actually stretching it through that 2 or 3 inch range, where you can feel the muscles around your hip and that ball joint of your hip begin to stretch and also relax. This fourth stretch is a partner hamstring stretch. You can also do this by yourself if you have a large towel or a belt by looping it around your heel, and I'll show you how it's done. I've got Mel on the ground here, and Ben's going to stretch her. When we start this stretch, you want to make sure that to take the tension off your low back, you start with a bent knee position. You can gradually extend your down leg, but not to full extension when you're doing this stretch. So we're going to have Mel lift up her right leg, and Ben, I'd like you to grab around her heel cup, and also to put your hand on top of her foot so that her ankle's in a dorsiflex position. Now, when we're in this stretch, ideally we want Mel's leg to be nice and straight, and we can pulse this stretch, so we can just ease up just a little bit on it and allow her to come back, and then go forward again, and we'll see if we can increase her range of motion. Go ahead and push, Mel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Relax and bend. You see if we can just increase that range, and I can see it fairly well. We've gone to just shy of 90, now to about 110, and you're starting to wiggle a little bit, so we're probably at the point where you can feel a fair amount of discomfort, but it doesn't hurt. This fifth stretch is a partner quad stretch, and quite often you see athletes out on the track or before their run or after their run stretching their quad like this, and I'm going to use Mel as my support here, reaching up, grabbing their leg, and pulling their leg up. Well, this stretches primarily the lower part of your quad, but it doesn't put your hip in hip extension. So when we set this position up, the first thing we want to do is to make sure Ben pushes his hips forward slightly, okay, tucks his pelvis underneath without arching his back. The second thing is that Mel has her hand cupped underneath Ben's knee and also her hand on his toes. We pull back into hip extension, so we move Ben's leg back to begin with without pulling up on the foot. Now in the second phase on this, we want to make sure that the knees are pointed straight down. We don't want the knee to flare out. Mel's applying pressure with the hand. We lift up and slowly push the heel in towards the butt, and ideally, if you're very flexible in a hip extension position, we can bring that heel all the way to touch the butt. This last stretch is called the shoulder back lat pec stretch. Now if you can say that, you're going to do it well. It hits the shoulder muscle, the lats, which are down the side, the pecs, which are in front, and also the back. So it's a partner stretch, and it's a great stretch. You're really going to feel this nicely all the way through those muscles, and it'll give you a nice big stretch through your chest, which will help you, particularly on the bike and running, and for your freestyle in the water. So Mel, go ahead and just lightly interlace your fingers or overlay them. Put them behind your neck, and you don't want to pull forward on your neck at all. You want to make sure that she's looking forward. Ben, you go ahead and hook up. We're going to go over the top of her arms, around the armpits, and then just have Ben interlace his fingers behind. The first part of the stretch is to pull back gently on her elbows, all right? And go ahead and bend, pull back lightly. And as she's doing this, she's going to begin to feel a stretch through her lats and also her pecs and her shoulders when she's doing this. Now the second part, we can ease up just a little bit, and we're going to put Mel on the rack and just lift straight up now. There we go. And Ben, you can keep coming up. All right. And go ahead and ease up again, but don't let go. Now this last one, we're just going to try to incorporate a slight half twist on this. So we're going to pull up on the left side and let the right side drop down. So go ahead and just twist, and we're pulling up, and we're going to feel it stretch all the way down. In fact, you're going to feel it stretch all the way down to your hip joint, and we'll go to the other side. And again, when we're doing these stretches, ideally if we can do each phase about 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and not as quickly as we're running through these. All 6 of these stretches can be incorporated into your routine, either before or after your sessions, or even at night if you have time where you're relaxing. Just to put in these 6 stretches, you're going to find that your range of motion is going to be enhanced and hopefully prevent some injuries down the road.